Okay, are we good to go? I think so. Welcome everyone and happy holidays. We welcome you to Facebook Live at Anselmo Academy of Music and the Arts. In the last few months, we have created this special monthly broadcast that features performing artists, teachers, educators, composers, and anyone else who has dedicated themselves to the world of music and the arts. And our goal is to share interesting story, performances, and great conversations. Let me introduce to you our guest today. Our first guest is Lidia Boguslavsky, who is joining us on Facebook as she is not using Zoom. Our guest number 2 is Marco Rapetti from Florence, Italy. Hi, Marco.
Hello. Hello, everybody.
Welcome. And our guest number 3 is Ben Finan from Berlin, Germany. Welcome, Ben.
Hey, Vera.
Hi, how are you guys? And you all serve on the honorary board at Anselmo Academy of Music and the Arts. And the honorary board is comprised of musicians and artists of different backgrounds who dedicate themselves to a variety of different professions. And they provide moral support to our organization and dedicate themselves to supporting morally our mission of providing music education and arts education to local communities. So thank you very much for providing your support. And actually, a spontaneous question just came to me before we proceed. Since we're almost at the end of 2020, let's talk about 2020. How did this year impact your life? Marco, let's start with you. Say a couple of words.
Well, I think it has been a pivotal year for everybody. I'm trying to convince myself that we can learn a lot from what happened. So I'm trying to convince myself that it's going to have some positive consequences, despite this the tragedy and the major changes in our lives. Probably we had to reflect a little bit more on our lifestyles and the way we were kind of anesthetized by modern life and consumism and the rejection of the idea of death. So I think that things will probably teach something to whom, to those who want to get that message. Hopefully our politicians as well.
Thank you so much, Marco. Brilliant. Ben, can you reflect a little bit on 2020?
I sure can. I think Marco's right in that for those of us who were not sick or out of work, this was an opportunity for reflection. I was fortunate in that I was able to keep working and that my job was already a remote one. Normally, I'm back and forth between New York and Berlin. Because of Corona, I've been in Berlin since March. A pause is definitely a word that comes to mind. I know that we'll have to move forward from here. I'm not really sure what that looks like, and I don't think anyone knows what it looks like. We've heard a lot about normal and the new normal, but to try and envision that new normal is a bit much to take in all at once sometimes. So I think that, moving forward bit by bit, as the vaccines come to market, and as we start to look at what a world looks like post-corona, is the best we can do right now.
Thank you so much, Ben. Did we all get wiser is the question. Let me get so I can hear you better. No, just kidding. So before we proceed, thank you so much for sharing it. This was kind of like spontaneous question, and I'm glad I asked. And I think it was appropriate because we are a few days away from closing 2020. So hoping 2021 will be a lot more positive. Let's just leave it at that, and create some good changes for all of us. I wanted to say a couple of words about Anselmo Academy of Music and the Arts. We are a nonprofit organization celebrating its 20th year anniversary this school year. We were formerly called the Piano School of New York and have recently rebranded because we started offering other instruments along with theater and acting classes. And our signature program, if you will, is by organizing enrichment group classes at local schools, after school programs, senior centers, and organizations that serve students with learning disabilities by providing music education and arts education to those that are interested in learning. Just reviewing my notes real quick. I think we are good to go to Lydia. Lydia Boguslavsky, before we play the pre-recorded video that we have, I traveled to her apartment in the last couple of weeks, Brooklyn, New York, and I have met with Lydia at her lovely home, and she shared her life story and performed for me live. So we're going to play that in just a second. And before we do, I'd like to share some of the pictures we have from her, starting from her childhood. Yeah, this is she with her mother. And then moving on to her performing with the symphony orchestra back in Soviet Union. This is a close-up. And I think the other pictures we have are from this country, where she is featured with her students at a variety of different festivals, master classes, and colleges. So this is some fun pictures of her. Great, so we are ready to play the video, and Marco and Ben and myself, we're gonna mute ourselves while this is being played. Welcome to Anselmo Academy of Music and the Arts series called Music is Life. Today, I am in Brooklyn, New York, visiting with Professor Lidia Boguslavsky. Welcome, Lydia, and thank you so much for hosting me in your beautiful home. It's lovely. I feel right at home here. Brief introduction, summary about your life and your career. You are a concert pianist, sought after pedagogue from the former Soviet Union. You have recordings of your many performances from way back when that are still on VCR. You had performed extensively across Soviet Union, giving solo recitals and chamber music performances, and also performances with orchestra. And after moving to New York, you have been on faculties at many well-known colleges and universities. You've been invited to many international music festivals, as well as master classes here in the United States and in Europe. And you are a sought-after pedagogue with students coming to you from around the world. And you also wrote scholarly works introducing your unique teaching method, continuing traditions of great Russian musicians. So before we go into detail about your life, I would like to ask you to play something for us, and please tell us what you like to play.
Maybe something, I don't know whole piece or maybe part of something?
Anything you like.
Okay, so now I'm working on Scriabin Prelude and Etude.
Perfect. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So let's now start with your childhood. Tell us all about your beginning studies in piano. Who was your first teacher? How did it all begin?
I was accepted in school, special music school for gifted children, affiliated to Conservatory Academy of Music.
And that was where?
It was
In what
in
city?
Russia.
In what city? In
Minsk.
Minsk.
Minsk, Belarusian Academy. I was 6 years old. I was the only in class who was 6 years old. So I graduated school with being very young.
Who were your teachers?
My teachers were all graduate from Moscow Conservatory. My third teacher was classmate of Sviatoslav Richter, Viktor Mirzhanov, and she was studying with Samuel Feinberg.
And what was her name?
Her name was Ella Alterman.
Okay.
After this, I went to conservatory and I began to study with professor of Moscow Conservatory, Yakov Milstein.
So let's talk a little bit about, so we have a picture of you with your mother at the piano. So was your mother a musician?
Yeah, she was musician. She was teaching in music college and conservatory. And she was my first teacher, at least notes and everything. I came to school knowing notes, rhythm, and
What was her name?
her name was Donna Dvoržets. It's my maiden name.
Oh, wonderful. And did you like to practice as a child?
I don't think that I like or I did not like. I knew that I have to. That's it. So I have to practice, especially because I was playing a lot in different recitals. I should have been prepared this. And in Moscow Conservatory, I was studying for 4 years instead of 5. Yeah. So when I came to my doctorate in Gnesin Academy, I was 20 something, because 25 I was faculty at Belarusian Academy, or maybe 24 years old I was after my doctorate. And it was doctorate old manner. It was not like just assistance. It was doctorate for 3 years old, and I should play recitals every year, not just listen lessons and observe lessons of wonderful teachers. No.
So who were your mentors through the
My
conservatory?
mentor was Alexander Yocheles. He was chair of piano department. And Gnesin Institute, it was Gnesin Institute, now is Gnesin Academy, and very, very good now, very good institution. You know, Evgeny Kissin graduated from Gnesin School.
Of course, very well known.
Yeah, very well known, definitely. And now I know that in Moscow it was competition, I think international. And again, boy from Gnesin School won first prize, Grand Prix.
Wonderful. So what brought you from Minsk to Moscow? Did you always plan to come to Moscow? How did that happen? That you
it almost, I knew that I should go to
To
Moscow.
Moscow.
Yes, because when I was in 8th grade, I began to go to Moscow. Fortunately, Minsk and Moscow very close. And even our faculty teachers, they lived in Moscow, but they've been teaching in Minsk. So they travel.
And what years were, if you can tell us,
60s.
in the 60s? That was your conservatory years?
Yes.
And
yes.
and
So
post,
60, 70, yeah, and 70, and 1970 I was already teaching.
teaching in
Yes.
conservatory.
Yeah, but every 3 years, teacher and instructor of conservatory should go to Moscow for half year. Just it's like not improving. In Russian, это повышение квалификации, just to upgrade your qualification. So we have 2 choices. One choice was observing. It's one for 1 month. Another choice was for 6 months, but you should play recital. Of course, I go for 6 months, and I played in Moscow Conservatory stage recital.
Wonderful. And so after you graduated your doctorate degree at Gnesin Institute, you went back to Minsk.
Yes.
And so you started teaching in Minsk, and so that was in the 70s, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
And so, do you remember who maybe were your peers? Meaning, who were the other musicians who you went to school with, who are maybe well-known musicians today, or were well-known? Any classmates that you remember that were studying alongside with you?
Classmates, I cannot. I remember violinist who was very famous violinist, Isaac Schuldman, and pianist, I cannot say. Not my classmate, but Leonid Kuzmin, who won many international competitions. He lives in New York. He won first prize in Arthur Rubinstein competition and several more. So they're all very famous.
Yes. And so when did you decide to move to New York, and why? And when was that?
It was very complicated because in Russia and Belarus. My brother lived in New York for several years in Boston, and we decided that we should move. and I grabbed my daughter, who was student of Moscow Conservatory, and we moved here. So that one. I began to teach in New York pretty fast, right? Pretty soon.
And so you started teaching, and you have been on faculties at many different universities. Why don't you tell us all about different...
It was Wagner College, it was Staten Island University, it was SUNY Purchase, it was very, very strong faculty, and Rowan University. I was a member of Leshutitsky Association, and I got several teachers there. And one teacher came to me after I played recital and said, by your playing, I can say that you are from conservatory, from university. I'm saying yes. And she invited me to be faculty at a festival in New Jersey. And she noticed that her name was Vida Zuponsik. She's a very good pianist and professor. And she invited me to teach in Rowan University. And I was staying there maybe for 10 years.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And so what about your students? Tell us a little bit about the legacy that you created with your teaching studio and your teaching studio. What are your students? What are their ages?
My student, for example, one is UCLA, she made her doctorate. Another student is Rochester, I forgot.
Rochester,
Yeah.
University, yes.
Yeah. Somebody is graduated from Manhattan School of Music. Somebody from Manus. So there.
So your students, even today, do you teach virtually, or your students come to you? How does that work?
They come.
They come.
They come.
So you teach them in
wearing
person.
Masks.
Wearing masks and they play.
Right. My former students, sometimes they need help. So this is we're making online lesson. But during the lesson, she was coming from California here because I was playing recitals in California and master classes in university. So I have students because regularly I was traveling there. So I have my students there who I'm helping. So that's why it's connection.
Wonderful. So let's talk more also about your concerts that you did throughout, former Soviet Union and Europe and USA. Take us through your concert career. So in Soviet Union, you performed with many orchestras and chamber music and solo recitals. Tell us maybe more about that. Who did you play with, let's say, as far as chamber musicians or orchestras?
In Minsk, I was working in Belarusian Philharmonic, so that's why it was only recitals. I was in concert group. In here, because I was teaching at international festival, faculty, it's very desirable that faculty can play recital. And this is, it almost, not all faculty teachers, but some of them. So that's how I play recital in Spain, Burgos Festival, and Italy, Castelnuovo de Carfagnana, Summit Music Festival, I played recital. So this is just like presenting faculty.
Wonderful. And so your most recent recital, you said, was about a year and a half ago. Can you tell us about your repertoire that you were playing, if you remember?
I play, usually when it's big recital, I play one Beethoven sonata, several Chopin ballades. And after this, I play whole suite Prokofiev, Romeo and Juliet, whole suite, 10 pieces. So, and I like to collaboration Schubert-Prokofiev. When I play Schubert for impromptus, it goes very well with Prokofiev. This is what I had when first recital, when I had Sviatoslav Richter play Schubert, and he combined Schubert with Prokofiev, and it fits very well.
Yeah, that's
very compatible. So I play Schubert with Prokofiev.
Do you have any plans, obviously, after the pandemic? What do you, are you
No,
planning?
I'm not planning anything because I don't know what's gonna be.
Yes, that's true, we don't know. So why don't you play for us another selection or two of something else that we would feature?
Speaking of Schubert, I play several arrangement Schubert in arrangement by Liszt.
Mhm.
Now this is a difficult piece, Schubert Liszt, Waltz Caprice number 6. Okay, I would try.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Wonderful. Thank you.
Скрябин, я там сделай кусочек Скрябина.
Okay, no problem.
Обещаешь?
Yes. And so, as we finish this interview and the conversation, what would you like to wish maybe young musicians, to a new generation of musicians that are maybe still in college or still figuring out their career path? What do you suggest to them from your experience?
From my experience, it depends. One of my colleague said that she only saying when she had a pedagogy class, she said, don't select good students, select good parents. That's why I'm saying that when teachers are in close contact with parents and they both understand what they want from student, how to make his brain to work in music, that music it's not how fingers running across the keyboard, just to make them more intellectual, so it will be good. Unfortunately, there are many lazy brains now. That's why I will suggest read more, listen more, and want more. That students wanting, it's number one priority. How badly he wanting this, and it will be rewarding.
Thank you so much, Lydia. We wish you happy holidays for this unusual ending of 2020. Wishing you much health and happiness in 2021.
And you are such optimistic, and you work so hard, and you put so much of your soul. So that's why I wish you the same and success in your work.
Thank you so much, Lydia. Okay, great. I just wanted to say thank you to Lydia. Hopefully she's watching on Facebook. And I was just, watching her play, and I'm amazed how, this profession of performing musicians enables, people already, of a certain age still carry out their professionalism and their ability with the instrument. Compare, let's say, to I don't know, figure skaters, right? I mean, they retire, or gymnasts, they retire and they can no longer perform, they can only teach. So that is really, I have to pinch myself. I'm really honored to be in this world, of musicians who continue to perform and play way, into the, elderly, age. And still you close your eyes and it could be somebody in their 30s playing the piano. It's really amazing. So I wanted to thank Lydia once again for participating. We're moving on to Marco Rapetti. Welcome, Marco. Just a brief introduction about, it's just a brief summary as to who you are. You have so many accomplishments, unique projects, and unique, you dedicated yourself to such unique parts of music as culture, as science almost. So you are a pianist, you're an educator, you what I would call a music anthropologist. You're, as I said, a scientist. You are an author, as you wrote many articles, and you wrote a book on Scriabin. You're a recording artist. You are a true ambassador for Russian music. You have played and recorded more Russian music than I seriously know anyone did who is not Russian, who is especially in the West. And you've really, found music that is almost never played by Lyapunov, by Glazunov, by Lezghinka, etc., among many others. And as I mentioned, you're an author, you wrote publications to specified magazines, and you wrote a book. So, and you have many awards, etc. And we'll cover all of that shortly. But first, we'd like to play a recording we have from you of Lezghinka. So would you please play that first? Which is, by the way, I just wanted to say that it's a male dance, if I remember correctly. It could be danced by one male dancer or two male dancers, and it's a folk kind of a.
And
dance.
also females.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, the middle section.
Okay, great. Let's play it. Great, wonderful piece.
The female part was just beginning. Now
Oh,
the beautiful theme, yeah.
Great, thank you so much, Marco. That was great. And I think I've heard that piece, but clearly I just want to mention it's not something that's played widely, even in Russia.
Well, actually, it's a study based on Balakirev. Of course, it's very similar. It's an homage to Balakirev because Lyapunov was his best student.
Great. See, you know more than me.
We all know Islamé,
Yeah,
but we never play Lezghinka.
Yes, that's true. So let's go to your childhood. I always like to, go there because I think these are such fundamental years in one's development. And so tell us a little bit about where you grew up, how you started music studies, etc. Go ahead.
Well, there is not much to say. I mean, I wish I grew up in Russia. In musical terms, it would have been very, very, very useful. Well, I grew up right near the famous bridge that collapsed in Genoa. And I don't have much to say because I don't come from a family where there were musicians. I don't come from a particularly musical area or culture. I just decided one day when I was 10. Actually, I was a Boy Scout, funnily enough. And I remember that I was I was making my first recording in the choir of the Boy Scouts. When we were in that studio, in that recording studio, I saw the first piano I actually saw in my life. It was a white upright, and of course we were a bunch of guys, of children actually. We were all about 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, and there was a major chaos going on in the studio because we were supposed to record all together. And all of a sudden, a young guy just sat at the piano and started the Moonlight Sonata. And then I went home and said, "Mom, I want to learn how to play that instrument." And that's it.
Let's take a pause for a second because we want to show pictures from your childhood. Oh, so this is you with your mom.
That's me with a funny hat.
Yeah. Wonderful. And so this is already you, obviously, as an adult with your teacher.
Yeah, yeah. Here I'm with Aldo Ciccolini, who has been a teacher of mine when I was already
an adult. So let's pause with pictures for a second, Jude. So tell us now more about your first teachers. Were they inspiration for you to study music, to continue your studies?
Yeah, well, since I was, quite a lonely child, and my parents were both working, so I had to basically be alone most of the time. The piano was a fantastic company, and instead of talking to the tiles and or to the toys, I started talking to a sounding object, and
I love it.
and I just took the first lessons. I've always been quite rebellious, I must say. I could never adapt to specific disciplines, so I could not adapt myself to the course of solfège and to all those things, just because I needed to make music, and I had to. I learned everything just by reading and by making music, not separately. And after a few months, I just applied for the conservatory, and they took me. And I started with a teacher who was very talented in those days. I mean, she was a great pianist, a great musician. But she almost never came to school to teach. But nevertheless,
Why was that? Why was that?
Well, yeah, Italian conservatories, let's say, they were not the same as in Russia, especially in those days. But it was interesting because I started, the usual repertoire, with Czerny and all the little etudes, the little sonatinas. But I was so bored. I could not. There was something missing, and this teacher was smart enough to give me already some music by Debussy. So if I have to say, with whom did you study? I studied with Debussy. And I studied with a great repertoire because I just felt the need to discover. I mean, I learned a piece. I mean, of course, at the beginning it was impossible to read, but the motivation was so strong to perceive, to get those wonderful harmonies and those sounds and those magnificent atmospheres that I felt, pushed to keep going. And so I became like a sight reading machine. And that's my basic training.
And so how old were you about? Were you like in your teens?
Yeah, when I was in my teens, yeah, I kept buying books, and I needed to know. I started with Debussy, and then with all major composers, and I needed to know to read. I needed to feel under my fingers all their compositions, not just one, not just the piece that I had to prepare for my exam.
Right. So that feeling of discovery was kind of built in your personality. I feel I'm finding this.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, let's say I feel very flattered for for your wonderful introduction. I don't know if I'm yeah, I play the piano, but I don't consider myself I'm just curious. I'm just a curious person, period.
Right.
And then I play the piano. I mean, because it's a fantastic instrument. But I'm just very sorry that in those days jazz was forbidden. Can you believe it? Yeah, jazz was still like the music of devil. And so there were no courses in the Italian conservatories. And I'm really sorry, because it would have been a very important part of a pianist training. I think everybody should go through that.
And so then you moved on to your conservatory training. So tell us a little bit where you went, where you studied.
Well, then I started teaching when I was 21 at the Conservatory in Milan. And well, I won a few competitions, and then I decided to, well, then I went to Washington for the William Capell competition, where I met Seymour Lipkin, and who invited me to come to Juilliard. And of course, it was a privilege for me. And I was very happy to move to New York.
And then we also have a picture of you at Juilliard. Can we show that picture? The next one, I think. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Jesus.
and we also have a picture of you with Sviatoslav Richter. Tell us a little bit about this relationship, this, how have you met? And you said that you actually were turning pages for him.
Yeah, well, I had a great career as a page turner. Because when I was in New York, I was working at Carnegie Hall. I was page turner there, so they always called me when a page turner was required. And then
how did you meet Richter?
I met him in Italy.
Okay.
And I turned pages for him quite a few times, and we had wonderful discussions on Russian music. I remember we had a lovely talk about Lyapunov. He was fantastic. I adore Richter. He's one of
Must
my...
have been very, very special. I'd like to now take a break and play the piece that you wrote, taking the theme from Verdi and Gershwin that you wrote while you were in New York. Let's
well, that's yeah. But I'm not a composer. But it's just a stupid little bagatelle, that combines Verdi with Gershwin. It's a parody, like the piece by Lyapunov we just heard, in a way. And I just wrote it when I came to Juilliard in a moment of nostalgia. It's just a stupid little thing. I mean, it's
but it's cute. Let's hear it. I really like it. Thank you for sharing it. So now I'd like to move on and talk about your awards and multiple competitions that you have won. So tell us more about that part. And then we, just so that you know, give you heads up, then we'll talk about your unique performances and recordings. So let's start with awards.
Okay, well, I hate competitions.
Okay.
I do hate competitions. I think they should be abolished. You cannot make music through competitions. It's a terrible world. I hate the music business. I do hate almost everything in that sense. So I cannot say, well, yeah, I won a few prizes, but it's I always thought it was not my you know, I always found there was something wrong with that idea that you are like a, you know, like a parrot that has to go on stage and show how good you are. I mean, it's music is so much more than that. So,
but tell us a little bit about William Capell competition in Washington and the chamber music competition for the European Year of Music. Tell us a little more about that. What repertoire did you play?
Yeah. No, the RAI competition in 1985 was my first competition, important competition, and I won it together with another instrumentalist, a violinist from Genoa, Paola Tomeo, and that of course gave us opportunities to make our first recording with complete Ravel music for piano and violin and concerts all over. But yeah, I think that the most interesting part is the recording projects.
Well, let's talk about your performances. What I like reading in your bio that you, in 1990 in New York, you performed Stravinsky concerto for 2 pianos. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I played that piece with a wonderful musician, with a colleague of mine at Juilliard, Jennifer Hagee, who's now a teacher in Colorado at Boulder University. Yeah, well, it's in New York. We had chances to do so many things. It was such a wonderful. I mean, Juilliard was such a fantastic place to be. And I remember when we performed in Lincoln Center, and I always loved Stravinsky's concerto. So it was such an opportunity. It was not that easy to do it here. So. And
for the 300th anniversary of the invention of the piano, you presented a lecture recital. Tell us a little bit about that. History of music. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, of course, you know, here in Florence we have an academy, the Cristofori Academy, and where they specialize in the history of the piano and the fortepiano, actually, and that repertoire. So after the invention of the piano that happened here in Florence, so it was interesting to kind of go through the history of the repertoire, starting with the very first piano sonatas specifically written for the instrument by Giustini. Mm-hmm. And they are actually lovely pieces, so interesting. Orzowski was the first pianist to record them many years ago, and then, you know, the history of the Italian piano repertoire is so strange in a way, because we never developed a great literature as other European countries. I'm not particularly interested in the Italian repertoire, I must say, nor in the Italian opera at all. So I I'm more German oriented and especially Russian oriented. So it's Russian opera and Russian music is certainly my main interest.
So in 2019, you perform a piano duet version of Scriabin Third Symphony. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, I was glad because I performed it with one of the musicians who actually had the greatest influence on me when I was a child, when I was young. Massimiliano Damerini, who is an extraordinary musician from Genoa, and I studied chamber music with him, and I had the honor to play with him this original transcription of Scriabin Symphony 2 years ago, and also to make a recording of Debussy's complete works for two pianos and for hands, with many works that are still completely unknown. Absolutely wonderful. There is a divertissement for four hands, which is absolutely a masterpiece.
And you've done recordings, I mean, at your website, that of course will post, by the way, all your credentials on Facebook comments, will post your website and your bio, and you know, you have tremendous amount of recordings. A lot of it is Russian music, but also French music. So tell us more about your CD collection that you have of your recordings.
Well, yeah. Well, I wish I could have done more, but yeah. In a way, it's not just my preference for neglected composers. I think it's I think that it's very important to know the scene behind the major figures to better understand them as well. So now that I'm preparing a recording of Hüttenbrenner music, that helps me to understand Schubert better in a way. And the same, you know, the same with other composer. Now, for instance, I love Fischer, who has been a major figure in relation to Bach, although I don't play Baroque music on the piano. So I play it for myself, but I wouldn't want to perform any Baroque repertoire unless, I don't know. I remember once I spoke with Gustav Leonhardt, and he told me, "You pianists are such a funny kind of musicians because you play on the piano. I mean, the majority of the major part of the repertoire you play on the piano was not conceived for your instrument. So why do you keep doing it?" Which is actually true. The modern piano was certainly not Bach's instrument, not Mozart's, nor Beethoven's. So
well, you could probably simulate Bach on the piano without using pedals,
yeah,
without you know applying certain articulation.
In any case, yeah. In any case, it becomes a transcription.
Yeah.
Yeah. While it's not a transcription if you perform Prokofiev or Brahms, yeah, or Ravel.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your Scriabin book. Can we feature a cover of the Scriabin book that Marco wrote? Yes. And the book is called Scriabin and the Sound Light.
Yeah, well, actually, I wrote just part of it, and I edited together with a wonderful scholar, Luisa Curinga. Yeah, it has been a fantastic experience. because in 2015 I organized two conferences on Scriabin for the centennial, and eventually we decided to publish the to write a book using that conference. And
tell us a little bit about what is the concept of that book? What is it about? What it focuses?
Well, there are different scholars who participated in it, and I wrote an article on this posthumous sonata that I completed, and which is a piece that is quite revealing in many ways. And of course, Scriabin is one of the figures that are more fascinating in that period. So it's I organized other conferences, but unfortunately we didn't manage to write a book, especially after a conference on Alkan, who's another composer I absolutely adore, and who's rarely performed actually.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about your teaching? You teach at the conservatory now, and you have any interesting students. Do you just teach piano, or you teach courses? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, well, now I'm I'm in a sabbatical period because I'm working again at university here in Florence in a doctoral program. So it's I won't be teaching for 3 years. So I have no teaching activity, well, I hope.
Teaching in general, is it something you have passion for? Or you
Well, yeah, I like teaching. I like teaching only adults, I must say. And it was funny because the last experience, teaching experience I had was in Spain in February. I was teaching at the Sevilla Conservatory through an Erasmus exchange program, and it was so wonderful. I found some wonderful students there, but unfortunately, all of a sudden they shut down everything, and I had to, yes, because of COVID.
Yeah.
And I had to drive to rent the first car available and drive back as fast as possible.
Yeah. So let's now play the last musical selection that we have for you, which is a Britain piece. And you told me just yesterday you learned it in 2 days. Tell us about how this all came about and about that performance.
Oh yeah, that video is terrible. Somebody recorded it with a telephone. Actually, it's a fantastic piece by Britten. Again, a work that is not known at all. Young Apollo, a piece written in 1939 for piano and string orchestra. And they called me 3 days before the performance because the pianist got sick.
Probably. Yeah, from learning it.
Yeah, and well, I got crazy, but I learned it.
Great.
Well, it was not Brahms' second.
Yes.
No, it's interesting because it can be considered the very first minimalistic piece because it's built on a simple A major triad. So Philip Glass.
Thank you so much for participating. Anything you'd like to say to maybe a younger generation of musicians who are maybe figuring out their path and maybe you'd like to hear from you? What would you tell them?
Well, there is nothing better than music to explore the world, to explore ourselves, and to explore our history, our identity, our memory, our feelings, our nature, everything. So I think that if we do it without that concern to become great performers who have to win major competitions and become stars and become businessmen of music and all that shit, it can be extremely, extremely useful. And I think everybody should do it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for participating. I enjoyed truly talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Our next guest is Ben Finan. Welcome, Ben.
Hello, Veroshka.
Yeah, yes, thank you. Just a brief summary as to who you are and your career. You are editor-in-chief at Steinway & Sons. You are publisher and editor-in-chief for your magazine that you created called ListenMusicCulture. That's multi-award winning magazine. You are producer and host of Soundboard, which is a podcast for Steinway. You are an author. Obviously, you also wrote, besides writing a couple of books, you wrote reviews for San Francisco Chronicle, New York Times, Playbill, among others. And before we actually go any further, we have a little clip from a video, the interview that you had with Marcelle Soviero, who is editor-in-chief of Brainchild magazine. Let's play that.
So tell us a little bit about your background and how you became an editor of a nationally renowned music magazine.
I was told there would be whiskey. My career has sort of vacillated between arts administration and editorial jobs. So in a way, this made the most of both of them. I actually started my career after college working at Carnegie Hall in their fundraising office. And I did a little more fundraising for other people and realizing that fundraising was not my thing.
Right.
So I made a shift to editorial, worked for a few websites, worked at the 92nd Street Y in New York City, first in their marketing department, also for their music school. And when we launched Listen magazine, I was actually working for Playbill in their classic arts division, which would be the playbills that do concerts and operas and ballet.
Terrific. So you've always sort of been kind of hanging around the music scene,
very much
classical music and literature scene.
I'd say around 2002, I started writing about music on the side for the New York Star Ledger, for the San Francisco Chronicle, for Time Out New York. And I knew that music journalism, or at least the few articles that I was writing, that wasn't going to be maybe a career, but I thought I'll just keep doing this no matter what my day job is.
You loved it.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah. And so you made it your career.
I sure did.
That's kind of exciting. That's wonderful. Very
much. I'm real proud of this magazine. It's a print quarterly. We underwent a transformation in tagline recently from life with classical music to life with music and culture.
Okay, just opening it up a little bit.
Very much. We're opening the musical and the cultural umbrella. And we use classical music certainly as our jumping off point, but it goes into other kinds of music, into jazz, into folk, into rock, as well as visual arts, as well as performing arts, architecture, cuisine, travel, you name it. But
so
just,
you're kind of starting a cultural conversation.
absolutely,
with the magazine.
that is very much the idea.
Terrific. That sounds absolutely fascinating.
Great, Ben. Very exciting. And so I'd like to, just like I did with Marco and Lydia, just talk a little bit about your childhood and your upbringing. Can you tell us a little bit where you grew up, your environment, your family, your friends, your first mentors, etc.? Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. I was born in San Francisco, but grew up in East Tennessee. Started taking piano at a fairly early age. I first took from a Russian teacher, Galina Balinki, and her husband taught violin. She taught piano. That was, it was a great start for me because I got out of the gate running with piano lessons. She was very strict. I could go from genius boy to idiot boy in a matter of minutes, depending on my performance at the
Did you
lesson.
have a whip or anything? Did she
She
hit
didn't
you on
need
your
one.
fingers?
No, she didn't hit me with the ruler or anything,
No.
but that was, the threats were implied. So I shifted from her to an Italian teacher, Celeste Vergona, and that was a more laid back approach, but still with competitions in mind. I hear what Marco was saying about competitions, and I think art as competition is a bizarre thing. It's a bit of an oxymoron because art is just should be for art's sake, music should be for music's sake. One thing about doing piano competitions that I feel was good is that initially, when you start playing competitions, you play worse at the competitions than you do when you play alone. And then you get yourself to a point where ultimately you can actually perform better in front of people. So the notion that I learned through those yearly competitions was an ability to harness that stress and funnel it into the playing, to where you could do a little more than you thought you could. So I played piano.
So,
Sorry.
yes, just a quick question. So were your parents musicians? How did the piano lessons come about? Did you want to study piano, or was it something your parents wanted you to study?
My father was fairly musical. He played saxophone. He was into all sorts of music. I think his very eclectic record collection got me started, not only with classical music, but also with jazz and with rock and with other genres. I don't see classical music as the top of any sort of musical pyramid. I don't see it as better than or worse than other genres. But that was certainly my introduction to music, was classical, taking piano lessons. I think my father's mother also played organ at the church.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, back in the day. So I'm sure that any musicality I got sort of came from his side of the family.
So when did you start writing?
I was always writing. As a kid, I would write little stories. I think I pretentiously tried to start a novel in junior high or so, and let that go after a few years. But when I went to college, I double majored in music and comparative literature, and that sort of brought those two things together.
Which is fantastic.
Yeah, I think and just as I said in that interview clip with Marcelle, music journalism, getting paid by the word for a review, making like $150 to go review a concert, come home, turn it around for the next morning. That's not a livelihood, and it's not something that could pass for as a full-time job, at least not when I was doing it, which was in the early aughts. So I really wanted to say, okay, I'm going to keep doing this on the side. And if it becomes something, great. And if it doesn't, great. So I was fortunate to be able to launch Listen magazine in 2009.
So hold on a second. So
yeah,
before
sure.
that, didn't Steinway and Sons editor position come before that?
No, I started Listen magazine with Eric and John Feidner, who then owned Archive Music. Archivemusic.com was a website where one could purchase classical CDs. And Listen magazine was something that started with Archive Music. Because we had a lot of classical listeners, the idea was that they would be interested also in a magazine about classical music. So we started that magazine, and then the entire package, Archive Music plus Listen, plus then a burgeoning record label, was all sold to Steinway and Sons. And so I came to Steinway as part of that package. And then we opened up the scope of the magazine to Listen Life with Music and Culture. And then we went from a print magazine to an online magazine. And so we're now exclusively online at ListenMusicCulture.com.
Great. We made short little clips featuring both websites. Jude,
Oh, wonderful.
Can you please play both of them back to back?
Great. So yeah, those were excerpts from the Steinway website. There's the podcast that I produce and host on artistry and craftsmanship called Soundboard. That's steinway.com/soundboard, and that comes out every couple of weeks. And then Listen is on its own URL.
Exactly. Yes.
Part of Steinway. Yeah.
Can we play also a little clip that we made from Listen magazine website?
Let's do it. Let's do it.
We do not have it. Good.
But we get to listen to Messiah during this festive time of year, so that's great.
Jude, we do not have the video. Can we try it again? Shall we pause and continue talking, then you play it later?
We could talk about Handel's Messiah.
Well, so tell us about since we just featured your podcast. Tell us about how this came about.
Sure.
And you do. Who are the musicians that you interview, and what is the audience? By the way, who is your I guess selected audience, or you hope for the people to hear you on your podcast?
That's a great question. So Soundboard is a podcast on artistry and craftsmanship. And I talk to a lot of pianists. I talk to a lot of musicians. And I also talk to people who aren't musicians. I talk to actors. I talk to writers. I talk to artists. Really anyone who creates, right? So taking Steinway and Steinway artists as like home base. And some big ones there for the podcast would be Billy Joel, Robert Glasper, Regina Specter. I've also interviewed Bill Murray. We just had a great, our most recent episode was with Isaac Mizrahi, who is the fashion designer. So I think the audience would be anyone who's interested in learning how it is that creative people create. And that's something I've always been interested in. I've always been interested in interviewing artists and finding out how they do what they do. And I think I have enough artistry myself, not to be an artist, but enough to ask the right questions And I'm very curious about that. And I'd like to think that the audience for such a podcast would be other curious listeners and culture appreciators.
Absolutely. Jude, can we now try again and play the clip from Listen Magazine website? Great. Wonderful. I took quite a bit of time looking at your website and reading many different articles, which I found very interesting. You cover current events. I mean, people who are still alive, like conductor Kirill Petrenko, who is one of the leading conductors today. You also have an article about how Tchaikovsky met Brahms and how they didn't like each other, which was very cool. And then you wrote a funny article, Beer's Culture, where you visited Virginia Arts Festival. So that was very amusing and entertaining. The two articles that I'd like to discuss today, the first one is Writer's Respite. And the reason that this came about and interested me very much, because it's an interview you had with James Stewart, who is a Pulitzer Prize winner, author, writer, and he plays piano every day. And he not only plays piano every day currently, but you go into detail and the history of how he finds that refuge in the piano, just like some people find in meditation. Or, and I think it's not enough actually cover that subject. We talk about importance of music education for children and how it develops their brain and their ability and all of the great things that music education brings to children. But I think that not enough being said about what is it that adults take from it? What is it that they find? And you yourself being an amateur musician, and you play the piano. And if I may actually quote, I love what James Stewart said as you interviewed him. He said, people ask him, why do you play the piano? And his answer is, I think it enriches my life or I wouldn't do it. And then he continues, it's very hard to play the piano. I know a lot of people do it and get discouraged, but so many things in life that are rewarding are difficult. So I don't mind that particularly. It's a way that makes it more satisfying. So I love that, his perception on music and how dedicated he is to playing the piano. So let's talk a little bit about, I hope that I'm not surprising you with that topic, on music education, not so much education, but that refuge that adults find in playing an instrument, who are not professionals, who are writers or businessmen, etc. And they come to play the piano on daily basis or what have you. Can you tell us a little bit your perception of that and why it's important for them?
Sure. And I think this goes back to what Marco was saying earlier, that music doesn't have to be goal-oriented. Music doesn't have to be, I'm trying to win a gold medal at a piano competition. Music can be for you. Or in the case of James B. Stewart, music can be a small salon that he holds at his apartment for friends. And I think people that engage in one creative activity often need another to balance that out, right? So he's a Pulitzer Prize winning financial journalist. That's one kind of creativity. There's a real creativity to creating words and arranging them on the page. And there's another to sitting down with a piece by Ravel and trying to arrange those notes on the page into something that makes sense orally, right? And both of those activities use your ears. So I don't think it's a coincidence that James spends his afternoon making the words sound good and spends his evening making the piano keys, bringing the notes to life, right? And I find the same thread in my life that everything I do, and I think we were talking about this earlier, Vera, offline, is somehow ear-based, right? So whether that is editing an article that someone else has written, whether it's editing an interview for a podcast and finding the right clips to complement what people are talking about, or whether it was playing piano or singing in a choir, or for me, even playing drums in the high school marching band. My ears are definitely a part of all of the activities that either pay me or that I take pleasure in.
Wonderful. Jude, can we feature this article, please? Writer's Respite. Not yet. No, the article.
There he is.
Yes. Wonderful. It's a great article. I read it from start to finish, and I highly recommend it. And so the other article I found very amusing was the Opera House, and it's your trip to St. Petersburg, Russia,
Yes.
where you call yourself Veniamin Vasilyevich, which was
That's
hilarious. And so tell us a little bit about your trip to St. Petersburg, why you went and people you met, and that would be interesting to hear.
Sure. So I took a trip to St. Petersburg along with a lot of other music journalists to witness the opening of the new St. Petersburg Opera House, and this was a few years back. And it's all there in the story. Gergiev was there, speaking to the journalists. Putin was there for opening night. And so, when I came back to the States to write it up, it had already been percolating that this would really be wonderful as a Russian absurdist short story, because there was a lot of absurdity happening around me, all that stuff, even, with the arrival at the airport, wandering around the city. Yeah, and as a music and literature guy, I've always been a fan of Russian short stories. Pushkin, Tolstoy, Gogol, Dostoevsky, Chekhov, Gorky. So it made sense to me. I thought maybe I can pull this off as a pastiche of a Russian short story, and show me as this main character literally stumbling around St. Petersburg, being rushed from event to event, because I had never been to Russia before. And I think for those of us who haven't been, it can be overwhelming. So I wanted to try to capture those feelings, the overwhelming sensations that Veniamin Vasilyevich has, and sort of, turn that into a piece of music journalism.
It's a fantastic story. I highly recommend it. Can we please feature that? Yes.
Yeah, so there are some stills from the new opera house. You can see the all the beautiful decor. Of course, no expense was spared, and it was quite an event.
Yes, and the article is called The Opera House, and it's by
right.
Finan. Fantastic. And so we also like to showcase some pictures that you've sent us that I think we showed them earlier, but at the wrong time.
Yeah, sure. We'll go through again. No problem.
Yes, go through the pictures again and tell us who those artists are, and maybe, you know, what inspiration you're leading them.
So this is Regina Specter. She's a very famous Russian-American singer-songwriter. And we were speaking for Soundboard, the Steinway and Sons podcast, there at Steinway Hall in New York City. Regina is wonderful and a real brilliant songwriter. I think for her inventiveness and for her originality. And she said during that interview that once she does something, she likes to try to not do it again. So she takes a very active stance on trying to always make sure that she's not retracing her own steps. And I find that a very brave move for someone who is as successful as she is, because it's easy when you are a pop artist, which she is, to kind of just go with what works, but she doesn't do that. It was really a fun interview.
Wonderful.
This is John Baptiste, and he was again at Steinway Hall for the release of the Steinway and Sons Spirio R. And the Spirio is a high resolution player piano from Steinway and Sons, and the R version you can also record on. So it's a piano that you record on and then you can play back on. So a real boon, I think, for artists and for pianists. And hopefully in 2021, we will see the Spirio in full effect by doing distance master classes. So we think of the old player piano, right, with the paper rolls and the holes in it, and now this is that for the 21st century. Comes complete with an iPad and a constantly updating library in the cloud. So a very cool new instrument from the company I work for.
Great.
And here's Bill Murray, American comedy legend and beloved actor, Bill Murray. And I think what I learned from Bill is how thoughtful he is. And it also reaffirms how insecure actors are. And I don't really mean that in a bad way, but just that they're always questioning things, always questioning their decisions, always questioning their path forward. So I think Mr. Murray can often seem a bit lost, but that's just because he's in a constant state of reflection.
Wonderful.
And here's Robert Glasper. He is a Steinway artist and he's a jazz cat, but he also is into hip hop and he's into soul. And he has an amazing ear, just a remarkable ear. And I think an amazing level of talent, which of course also combined with hard work, has allowed him to build a truly remarkable crossover career that continues today.
Wonderful.
And that's me just playing on a Steinway. I was sitting in. I think we were doing a shoot of that instrument. I'm not sure of the model number. It looks pretty small, so I would say that's probably an M or an O, but couldn't tell you for sure.
Great. We actually have a video of you playing on a toy.
Okay, let's do it.
Let's play that.
That's pretty. What was that, Ben?
That was absolutely
What is
nothing.
it?
That sounded nice.
All right.
What is it?
Oh, that was nothing. I was just improvising on the toy piano. That was at Greenwich House Music School with my friend Menon Dwarka, who now works for Soundstreams, the executive director of Soundstreams in Canada. And again, I'll do a callback to what Marco was saying about the importance of jazz. And I did study jazz a bit, and I think that the art of improvisation in music is important regardless of what genre you're playing in. So inspired by the toy piano, I played a little throwback tune there.
Wonderful. And Ben, so similar question that I asked Lydia and Marco, obviously not just to musicians, but any creative individuals who are looking to explore and find themselves. What would you advise any young, maybe still students in their 20s that are searching their way?
I think it's really important to be flexible and to keep up with what's happening. When I went to college, my freshman year, our dorm rooms were hardwired for the internet. It was the first year. This was in like '96. And when I started my writing career, I was writing for newspapers. So you guys know the rest of the story. Initially, everything was print. There were CDs, there were newspapers, there were books. Then with the rise of online, there was sort of an uneasy tension between online media and offline media. And now online media has sort of taken over. You can see it in my own magazine that went from print to an online space. And it's very important. I don't want to say don't fight it, but I do want to say be aware of it. Be aware of how the changes in technology are going to affect your art, and stay on top of it. We saw what happened to the record companies when they didn't stay on top of it, right? Spotify has taken over. We've seen what happens to editorial publications that haven't stayed on top of the shift. You now have Medium. People get their news from Facebook. People are on Instagram. So all of these apps and platforms are now the content producers, or at least the content providers. And I'm even saying the word content, whereas 20 years ago, I would have said editorial, right? So all of these things are shifting, and it's important to stay on top of it, to stay a step ahead. And this is true with music, right? If you are a composer and you're writing something, who's going to play it? Where's it going to be performed? How is it going to be sold? How is it going to be quantifiably used in the present musical space? How is it going to be monetized? These are real world questions that you have to ask yourself. And I don't think it's enough to say, I love to sing, so I'm going to sing. Okay, that's great. While you're singing, what's your other job? And I said this about myself. Music journalism was always a side hustle for me. And in a way, it still is. I work for Steinway and Sons, which is, they make beautiful, wonderful pianos, but they're also a luxury manufacturer, right? That's my day job. And everything else is a side bet, a side hustle, a pursuit. So I think it's wonderful to pursue a career in the arts, but I think you have to stay on top of your technology. And I think you have to think about, how am I going to make a living at the end of the day? And if you're at a point where the singing that you're doing starts bringing in enough to where you can leave that day job, that's fantastic. Or to where you can cut your day job down to part-time, also fantastic. Or if you're also willing to accept a different lifestyle, a lifestyle that's going to be a little riskier, a little more rough and tumble, and that's okay with you, that's great. But go in with your eyes open, know what you're getting into, and have a plan. And at the same time that you're having a plan, you also have to be able to improvise and take advantage of opportunities that come your way and find a way forward, just like we're all going to have to do next year as the pandemic hopefully subsides.
Great answer. Thank you so much, Ben. Thank you, Marco.
Vera.
Thank you, Lydia, if you're still watching. Thank you, everyone who's been watching with us. Thank you to my assistant, Jude. Wishing you all fantastic holiday season and a happy new year. Take care. Bye.